Nobody expected Ethan Cole to attend the interviews that morning. At Cole Enterprises, the billionaire CEO was known for making decisions from a distance. Cold emails, sharp directives, and meetings that ended before anyone could breathe. His presence in the recruitment room sent a quiet wave of panic through the staff. Even the senior managers sat straighter, their voices more careful, their smiles more rehearsed. One by one, candidates walked in, delivering polished answers and predictable confidence. Ethan remained unimpressed. To him they all sounded the same, perfect on paper, empty in reality. Then Lily Harper walked in. She wasn't the most glamorous candidate. Her outfit was simple, her hands slightly trembling as she adjusted her folder. But there was something different about her, not loud, not forced, just real. When she sat down, her voice was soft, but steady enough to hold attention. She didn't pretend to know everything. When she didn't have an answer, she admitted it. When she spoke about her past jobs, she focused less on achievements and more on what she had learned. It wasn't the kind of response that usually impressed a billionaire. But Ethan found himself watching her more closely than the others. Not because she was flawless, but because she wasn't. For the first time that morning, he leaned forward slightly, his sharp gaze studying her not as a resume but as a person. The room grew quiet as she finished speaking. The hiring manager hesitated, flipping through papers, clearly unsure. But Ethan didn't hesitate. "She starts Monday," he said, his voice calm but final. Lily blinked, surprised. The others in the room exchanged glances, confused by his sudden decision. And just like that, her life changed, though neither of them knew how deeply yet. Because in a company built on control, perfection, and distance, something unexpected had just been allowed in. By Lily Harper's third day at Cole Enterprises, one thing had become painfully clear. Ethan Cole was not a man people relaxed around. He was a presence. The kind that silenced conversations mid-sentence and made experienced employees second-guess themselves. His footsteps alone were enough to send assistants scrambling back to their desks, posture straight, eyes focused, as though perfection might shield them from his scrutiny. From a distance, Lily had already noticed it. But up close it was different. Colder. Sharper. Every instruction he gave was precise, leaving no room for misunderstanding or mistakes. And when mistakes did happen, his responses weren't loud or dramatic. They were worse. Controlled. Disappointed. Final. Yet somehow, Lily's experience with him wasn't quite the same. On her second day, she had misplaced a document. Nothing major, but enough to delay a meeting. She had expected the worst when she was called into his office. Her heart had pounded as she stepped inside, bracing herself. But instead of tearing into her, Ethan had simply looked at her for a long moment. "Fix it," he said. That was all. No raised voice. No humiliation. Just a quiet command, and an expectation that she would rise to it. And she did. By the end of the day, the issue was resolved, and the meeting rescheduled seamlessly. When she handed him the corrected files, their fingers briefly brushed. It was nothing, an accident, but for a second his gaze lingered. Not cold. Not harsh. Just observant. It left Lily unsettled in a way she couldn't explain. Because while everyone else feared Ethan Cole for his ruthlessness, she was beginning to notice something beneath it. Something quieter. Something restrained. And though she tried to ignore it, a small part of her couldn't help but wonder. Why was he watching her differently? By the end of Lily Harper's first week, she had learned how to move carefully within the walls of Cole Enterprises. Speak when necessary, observe always, and never draw unnecessary attention. So when the company dinner was announced, she almost didn't attend. It wasn't mandatory, but absence would be noticed. And in a place where impressions mattered, she couldn't afford to seem uninterested. Still, as she stepped into the softly lit restaurant that evening, she immediately felt out of place. The room was filled with confidence. Tailored suits, effortless laughter, conversations that flowed as easily as the wine being poured. Lily lingered near the edge, her hands clasped together, offering polite smiles when spoken to but never quite settling in. At first, the conversations were harmless. Work updates, promotions, travel stories. Then slowly the tone shifted. A group nearby began discussing relationships, boldly, casually, as if it were just another topic to dissect. Expectations, experiences, assumptions. The kind of conversation Lily had never been comfortable with. She tried to tune it out. But then someone laughed a little too loudly. "Come on, at this age? That's hard to believe." The words weren't directed at her. Not exactly. But they felt like they were. Her chest tightened, her confidence slipping. She reached for her bag, deciding it was time to leave quietly, before anyone could notice how out of place she truly felt. Leaving already? The voice stopped her. Oh, familiar. Lily turned, her breath catching slightly as she met Ethan Cole's gaze. For a brief moment, the noise around them seemed to dull. I just remembered I have something to finish, she said softly, avoiding his eyes. Ethan didn't respond immediately. His expression didn't change, but his gaze shifted, briefly scanning the room, the conversation, the subtle discomfort written across her face. Then, without raising his voice, he spoke, clear enough to cut through the chatter. That's enough. We're here to represent the company, not lower its standards. The laughter nearby died instantly. Silence followed. Lily blinked, surprised. He hadn't called anyone out directly, but he didn't need to. And somehow, without saying her name, he had protected her. For the first time that night, she didn't feel invisible. The office was nearly empty when it happened. Long after the usual rush of footsteps and closing doors had faded, only a few lights remained on across the top floor of Cole Enterprises. Lily Harper sat quietly at her desk, focused on finishing a report she had promised to complete before morning. She liked the silence. It gave her space to think without pressure, without the constant awareness of being watched or measured. For once she felt at ease. Until she heard his voice. You're still here. Lily looked up, startled slightly as Ethan Cole stepped into view. His presence, even at this hour, carried the same quiet authority, but without the usual tension of a full office around them, it felt different, less distant. I wanted to finish this, she replied, gesturing lightly to her work. He nodded once, stepping closer, his gaze briefly scanning the document before settling on her again. There was no urgency in his posture, no immediate command, just observation. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, unexpectedly, he asked, "Why do you hold yourself back?" Lily blinked, caught off guard. "I don't understand." Ethan studied her, his expression unreadable, but his tone remained calm. "You avoid conversations. You stay on the edges. You act like you don't belong here." The words weren't harsh, but they landed heavily. She looked down, her fingers tightening slightly around the pen in her hand. "It's not that," she said quietly. "I just don't think everything needs to be shared." There was a pause. And then, without warning, he asked the question. Blunt, direct, unfiltered. "Are you a virgin?" The air shifted instantly. Lily's breath caught, her face flushing as shock and embarrassment collided all at once. For a second she couldn't even process the words, only the weight of them. She started, then stopped. Her voice softened, almost fragile. "That's not something people just ask." The silence that followed was heavier than anything before it. And in that moment, Ethan realized something he hadn't expected. He had crossed a line. Not out of cruelty, but out of a lack of understanding of her. And for the first time, the man who never misstepped felt the sharp edge of regret. The silence from that night didn't disappear. It followed them into the next day. Lily Harper arrived early as she always did, but something had shifted. Her usual quiet confidence was replaced with careful distance. She kept her head down, her interactions brief, her presence smaller than before. And Ethan Cole noticed. He noticed the way she avoided his office. The way her voice lost its warmth. The way she no longer looked at him, not even by accident. It unsettled him more than he expected. By mid-morning, the tension in the office had become almost tangible. Staff whispered as usual, but today their conversations carried a sharper edge. Judgment, assumptions, careless curiosity. The kind of environment Ethan had always ignored. Until now. He stepped out of his office just as a conversation near the corridor grew louder. "Some people act innocent, but that's enough." His voice cut through the air like a blade. The entire floor went still. Ethan's gaze swept across the employees, not raised, not emotional, but controlled in a way that felt far more dangerous. "This is a workplace," he continued, each word deliberate. "Not a place for speculation about personal lives." No one spoke. No one moved. "And if I hear anything like this again," he added quietly, "you won't be part of this company long enough to repeat it." The message was clear. Final. The whispers died instantly, replaced with a silence that lingered even after he turned and walked away. But he didn't return to work. Instead, he stopped just outside Lily's desk. She froze slightly, sensing him there before she even looked up. For a moment he said nothing. Then, more quietly than she had ever heard him speak, "I shouldn't have asked you that." Lily looked at him, surprised. There was no authority in his tone. No distance. Just honesty. And something else, something unfamiliar. Regret. "I'm sorry," he added. It was simple, direct. But coming from Ethan Cole, it meant everything. And in that moment, Lily saw it clearly. The man everyone feared wasn't angry at her. He was angry at himself. After the apology, something subtle began to change. Not overnight. Not in a way anyone else could easily point out. But between Ethan Cole and Lily Harper, the sharp edges of their interactions slowly began to soften. Lily didn't immediately return to how she had been before. She was still careful, still guarded in her words. But the tension that once lingered between them started to ease, replaced by something quieter, something more understanding. Ethan, on the other hand, became intentional. He no longer spoke to her only in instructions. When he stopped by her desk, he would pause for a moment longer than necessary, asking simple questions. Not intrusive, not overwhelming, just enough to show he was paying attention. Did you finish the report? Was the client meeting manageable? Are you keeping up? They were small things. Ordinary even. But from him they felt different. Lily noticed it. And slowly she responded. Her answers became less rushed, her voice steadier. She began to meet his gaze again, even if only for a second at a time. There was still caution there, but also a growing sense of comfort she couldn't deny. One evening, as the office emptied once again, Ethan found her reviewing documents at her desk. You stay late often, he said. Lily gave a small nod. It's easier to focus when it's quiet. He leaned slightly against the edge of the desk, not imposing, just present. I used to do the same, he admitted. The word surprised her. You did. He gave a faint, almost unnoticeable smile. Before everything became constant. It wasn't much. Just a glimpse. But it was the first time he had shared something personal without being asked. And Lily felt it, the shift. The walls he had built so carefully weren't gone. But they weren't as solid as before. And for the first time, their conversations didn't feel like distance being maintained. They felt like distance, slowly closing. The pressure had been building for days, though Lily Harper had done everything she could to hide it. Deadlines stacked higher. Expectations grew sharper. And though she worked tirelessly to keep up, the quiet confidence she once carried began to wear thin. Small mistakes crept in, nothing major but enough to make her doubt herself. By the end of the week it became too much. The office had emptied, leaving behind the familiar stillness she once found comfort in. But tonight it felt heavier, colder. The silence no longer soothed her, it echoed. Lily sat alone in the break room, her hands wrapped tightly around a cup of tea she hadn't touched. Her thoughts circled endlessly. Maybe I don't belong here. Maybe they were right. The door opened softly. She didn't look up at first, but she didn't need to. You're still here. Ethan's voice was quieter than usual. Lily blinked quickly, trying to compose herself. Just finishing up, she said, though her voice didn't quite hold. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he stepped closer, noticing the untouched tea, the tension in her shoulders, the way she avoided his gaze. You were about to leave earlier, he said. What changed? That was all it took. The question wasn't demanding. It wasn't sharp. It was concerned. And it broke through everything she had been holding in. I don't think I can do this, she admitted softly, her voice trembling despite her effort to steady it. I'm trying, but it feels like I'm always one step behind. Ethan didn't interrupt. Didn't correct her. Didn't dismiss her fears. For a moment, he simply stood there, as if weighing something far more important than any business decision. Then quietly he closed the distance between them. Lily barely had time to react before she felt it. His arms, gentle but certain, pulling her into a steady embrace. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't awkward. It was grounding. You're not failing, he said softly, his voice close, calm. You're learning. Lily froze at first, surprised by the unexpected closeness. But slowly, the tension in her shoulders eased, her grip on the cup loosening as she allowed herself, just for a moment, to feel safe. And in that simple, silent hug, everything shifted. The hug didn't become a topic of conversation. Not the next day. Not even in the days that followed. But it changed everything. Lily Harper returned to work with a quiet steadiness she hadn't felt before. She still worked hard, still kept to herself in many ways, but there was a new confidence in her steps, a subtle sense of belonging she could no longer deny. And Ethan Cole noticed. He noticed the way she spoke more clearly in meetings. The way she no longer hesitated before sharing ideas. The way her presence, once so easy to overlook, now carried quiet strength. But not everyone saw it the same way. The whispers returned. Softer this time. More careful. But still there. People noticed the shift between them. The longer conversations, the moments where Ethan's attention lingered just a second too long, the unspoken understanding that seemed to pass between them. And with that came assumptions. Lily heard them. Not directly. Never to her face. But enough to make her pause, to make her question whether staying was worth the weight of being misunderstood. By the end of the week, she had made her decision. She stood outside Ethan's office, resignation letter in hand, her heart heavier than she expected. This wasn't just about work anymore, it was about protecting what little peace she had found. She knocked softly. "Come in." Ethan looked up as she entered, immediately sensing something was wrong. His gaze dropped briefly to the paper in her hand, then returned to her face. "What is that?" he asked. Lily hesitated, then stepped forward, placing the letter gently on his desk. "I think it's better if I leave," she said quietly. The words landed harder than she intended. Ethan didn't touch the paper. "Why?" he asked, his voice steady but lower than usual. Lily swallowed. "Because people are talking. And I don't want to be the reason your company—" "You're not." He stood before she could finish. Not abruptly. Not angrily. But with purpose. "I don't care what they're saying," he continued, his eyes fixed on hers. "And you shouldn't have to leave because of it." Lily looked at him, unsure. For a moment, the room felt smaller, the distance between them thinner than ever before. "I don't want you to go," he said. "Not as a boss. Not as a command. But as something far more vulnerable." And in that moment, Lily realized. This wasn't just about staying or leaving anymore. It was about choosing. And maybe, being chosen. Lily Harper didn't leave. Not that day. Not the next. The resignation letter remained untouched on Ethan Cole's desk, quietly forgotten. Not because it didn't matter, but because something more important had taken its place. Understanding. From that moment forward, Ethan made a choice, not through words but through actions. He stopped standing too close when others were around. He kept their conversations professional and public, measured and appropriate. There were no special treatments, no visible favoritism, nothing that could give life to the rumors. But in the quiet moments, when the office emptied and the noise faded, he remained present, consistent, respectful. He didn't push her for answers. Didn't ask for anything she wasn't ready to give. Instead, he gave her something she had never expected from someone like him. Space. And within that space, trust began to grow. Lily saw it in the way he listened when she spoke, even about the smallest things. The way he remembered details she didn't think mattered. The way his tone softened, not just with her but gradually with others, as though her presence was changing him from the inside out. And in return she began to open up. Not all at once. Not dramatically. But slowly, piece by piece. She shared stories about her past, her struggles, her fears of not being enough, her quiet determination to build a life she could be proud of. Ethan didn't interrupt. Didn't fix things. He simply stayed. One evening, as they reviewed a project side by side, Lily paused, her voice thoughtful. "You're different," she said. Ethan glanced at her. "From what?" She gave a small, honest smile. "From who you used to be." He didn't deny it. Because the truth was simple. He hadn't changed because he had to. He changed because he wanted to. Because somewhere along the way, without pressure, without expectation, Lily Harper had become someone he didn't want to lose. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Cole wasn't controlling the outcome. He was allowing it. Years had passed, though it hardly felt that long. Lily Harper and Ethan Cole had grown together, carefully, quietly, in ways no one outside the office would have noticed. Their relationship wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was steady, strong, and built on trust that had taken years to earn. Ethan had learned to soften without losing his edge. Lily had learned to stand her ground without fear. Together, they had found balance, an understanding that neither had thought possible when their paths first crossed. That afternoon, Lily stood in the sunlit corner of Ethan's office, looking out at the city skyline. The glass walls reflected the life they had built, both in business and in the quiet moments between meetings. Ethan stepped up behind her, his hand brushing hers lightly, familiar, comfortable. She didn't flinch. She smiled. "You've come a long way," he said softly, not as a boss, not as a colleague, but as someone who had watched her become the person she was always meant to be. "And so have you," Lily replied, leaning slightly into his presence. "I never thought." Her voice trailed off, but he understood. He nodded, eyes warm, steady. "Neither did I. But here we are." They didn't need grand declarations. No dramatic gestures. Just the quiet, unwavering assurance that they had chosen each other every day, through challenges, doubts, and even mistakes. He reached out, pulling her gently into a hug. Not the first hug, but one that carried every shared moment of understanding, respect, and love. And for the first time, the world outside their office didn't matter. The past didn't matter. The whispers, the doubts, the pressure, they were all gone. Because here, in this moment, they had everything they needed. A life built together. A love earned. And a future they would face, forever, gently and without fear.